So today I would like to talk about an extremely critically important concept that I haven't seen many people get, except for one of my most, let me rephrase that, except for my most loyal viewer. I won't mention names because I don't like to mention names on here, but my most loyal viewer, you know who you are. You get this concept. And it is this. In 1 Kings 13, there's a story. It's a story about a man of God. And God tells him to do something. He says, do this, and gives him very explicit instructions on what to do and what not to do. And so he heads off and he does what God told him to do, and then he's on his way home. And another guy who was in the area, who was a prophet, heard about it, and for whatever reason, I have no idea what that reason is, he decides to go and tempt this guy to do something that God specifically and explicitly told this man of God not to do. So he saddles up his donkey and goes and finds the man of God who's on his way home after completing his mission. He says, "Hey, God told me that you're supposed to come home with me and get refreshed and spend the night," or something along those lines. And so the man of God goes, "Oh, well, okay. This guy's a prophet, so it must be God, so I'll go with him." So he does. And he goes with him. And at some point during the story, the prophet turns to him and goes, "Ugh, why didn't you stick to the plan and do exactly what God told you to do?" And the rest of the story has a sad ending. You can look it up if you want to know the rest of it, but it teaches us a critically, extremely important detail, and it is this: that God must be the first voice that you listen to and obey, and men, even men of God, even prophets, must be the second voices that you listen to. And I have seen a lot of people make this mistake. I used to make it tons, and I suffered because of it. Always the choir preaching on this channel. And the mistake is that 80% of the Christian people that I have known made this mistake, and they followed they followed the prophet or the people speaking for God before they followed God's voice. And you can't do that, because it'll get you in trouble. Now, we are called to listen to both of them. We have to listen to God, and we have to listen to those who speak for God, right? Because God has his structure of authority, and we are to submit to it. So, it is the proper thing to do to listen to men of God who speak for God, but it is not proper to do so when their instructions counter God's instructions in your life, because that can get you in serious trouble, as we see in that story. So this requires that we have a relationship with God, a relationship that's close enough and real enough and authentic enough that we actually hear God ourselves. We take the responsibility to have that relationship with God ourselves instead of abdicating it to somebody else, i.e. a man of God or a prophet or a teacher. We take the responsibility to have a relationship with God ourselves so that we hear His voice first and obey it. And that keeps us safe. And then, if we hear a voice from men, a man of God or a prophet, that contradicts God's voice, well, it's a clear choice. We have to go with God. But I have seen that the majority of people in the faith that I have known do the exact opposite. They take the voice of the men of God first, or the prophet first, over God's voice. And that's the mistake. You have to listen to God's voice first, and that requires having a personal, authentic relationship with Him. To get back to the 80-20 principle, it seems to me that about 80% of the people I knew made that mistake of listening to the men of God before they listened to God Himself. And I was one of them. I am completely preaching to myself, and I suffered greatly for it. But I'll tell you this, I'm never going to make that mistake again, by the grace of God, because it's very costly. Have a nice day.